Okay, great. So welcome everyone. We are here this evening. We're very excited to have you all to join, and we're joined by Dr. Adrienne Youdim and one of our wonderful clients, Zina Manzareh. And we're going to share a little bit more about the Women's Leadership Network. I'll just give you a brief 1-minute overview. I think many of you are very familiar, but the Women's Leadership Network started with 3 friends over about 10 years ago, more now, I believe, and it grew into this amazing network of women and male allies, thank you, that every year we put on a really fantastic conference, the Woman to Woman Conference. It is every November, and many of you have been to the conference before, both in person or maybe last year when we had it virtually. We are doing it again virtually this year. It's Thursday, November 18th, from 9 a.m. to 10:30 a.m. Pacific time. So we're really excited to be presenting tonight. Just a little kickoff to the conference. We always like to every year bring you women leaders in the community and women with really wonderful stories to share that really inspire us. So this is, we're very excited to share Dr. Adrienne and Zina's stories with you this evening. So just a quick shout out to
mute everybody.
Oh yeah, here, hold on.
I think that might be Deb's.
Oh yeah, I think Zina, maybe you were sharing the screen for a moment. All right, I'll mute everyone. Okay. Oh, Zina, I think you're by accident sharing your screen. Okay. Okay.
Sounds like a bocce game to me.
It does.
Hold on,
Exactly.
hold on. Is it star 68?
All right. So, Dr. Adrienne Youdim is an internist. She specializes in weight loss and clinical nutrition, but she's really, her mission
There's
is to
still
transform
background.
the,
Lindsay, there's still all this background noise.
Yeah.
Sorry. Like a lot of people talking.
yeah, if everyone could please mute. I can't find the mute all. Please mute if you are not currently on mute. I'll try to.
It seems like it might be Deb's phone.
It's Deborah Levy.
Can
Deb's
you
at
hear
a
me?
game. I think Deb is at a game. If we could text her, maybe tell her.
Okay, yeah, I think I got it.
I did. I put it in the chat.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. All right, sorry. So Dr. Adrienne Youdim is an internist and a clinical nutrition expert, and but her real mission is to transform the weight loss narrative and the wellness journey into one that is empowering and compassionate. So she has some really amazing things to share with us tonight. And without further ado, I'd love to turn the mic over, as it were, to Dr. Adrienne Youdim. Welcome.
Thank you, Lindsay, and thank you to all the lovely ladies and male allies. I'm so happy to be here. I'm such a fan of your organization and your founders, and so really it's an honor and a pleasure to join you. So I want to start by giving you a little bit of background. So back in 2006, I was in the curious position as the medical director of a weight loss program at a very prestigious medical institution. And the story of me getting there is kind of convoluted, but basically I was on a completely different path, decided really in a whimsical fashion after 4 years of marriage that I would get pregnant. I decided over Shabbat dinner at my mother-in-law's house, while I was sharing a seat with my husband. Next thing I know, I'm pregnant and I drop a GI fellowship at USC. I had an idea to do a medical part of a surgical weight loss program that was already in existence. I shared the idea with my chairman. he liked it and told me to create a business plan. And as a physician and child of a PhD, I had no idea what he was talking about and went to the library where I Googled how to write a business plan. I don't even think I knew how to use Google back then because we weren't really using Google for medical information the way we are now. And so, yeah, next thing I know, I'm post-call one day as a resident. I get called to the boardroom. I put on chapstick and I'm like using, like whatever means I can to, bat down the frizz of my hair. And I get shown a whiteboard where they put my name and a surgeon's name and basically introduced me as the co-director of this program. I can still feel the smoke of the surgeon next to me, but I'm not going to get into that. So this was 2006, and we're in the midst of this huge epidemic, obesity epidemic, and it's affecting every aspect of medical care. It is, and medicine. It is costing the healthcare system millions, billions of dollars, actually. And yet, as physicians, we were woefully unprepared in how to address this problem. We were on the heels of botched bariatric surgeries and the fen-phen debacle, and our really, frankly, our ineptitude and lack of emotional intelligence as physicians to address this issue had really relegated it to self-proclaimed gurus and commercial weight loss programs. So here I come in, and knowing this, really wanting to substantiate this field within medicine. Not to mention, of course, the desire to substantiate myself. I'm young, I'm female. I've opted to work with male surgeons. And so there was that, but I went out really to substantiate this field. And so I am giving lectures locally, nationally, giving grand rounds, creating CMEs, educational programs, inserting myself into every management group in the institution, and prescribing evidence-based drugs and evidence-based dietary plans to my patients, trying to be, doctory as it were, knowing that while I'm trying to manage people's physiologic hunger, there's something else at play. All the while I had the sense that people have an emotional hunger, a spiritual hunger, that of course at the time I didn't address because I didn't think it was doctory enough. And so I went on for years kind of in this way without saying anything. And mind you, the science supports this. So a little bit about hunger in general, which is that our hunger is a physiologic thing, right? It's a bodily sensation, and it is managed by a complex array of hormones. When our stomach is empty, our gut releases hormones to our brain. It signals hunger. We eat food, those hormones drop, and we're no longer hungry, okay? But something interesting happens when we are faced with stress and difficult emotions, and this is actually scientifically proven. That even in a fed state, when we really are sated and shouldn't be hungry, difficult emotions, sadness, boredom, longing, desire, these emotions actually trigger our hunger hormones despite being fed, despite not being physiologically hungry. And of course, the last couple of years has really showed this, right? We have seen in mass how these emotions of listlessness and boredom and sadness and frustration and uncertainty have kind of kicked up our hungers. And I, by the way, at the time was facing my own hunger for autonomy. I was now in a position after 10 years of being in this program that I wanted professional autonomy, hunger to be valued and to be seen, hunger for creativity and to do some of the projects I have done since I left. And so I'll never forget, I was in a leadership meeting in which they had picked a handful of us, physicians and administrative people, and had basically said that you are the future of Cedars-Sinai. And while I was being primed and pruned in this meeting, in this program, it became really clear to me that while I loved the institution, while I loved my colleagues and the work that I was doing, that this was really not my future. And so it took me 3 years of marinating on this idea. And ultimately, one day after this leadership meeting, while I'm sitting at the kitchen counter, sobbing into my first glass of wine, second glass of wine, maybe there was a third, I finally picked myself up and rinsed out my wine glass, and I decided to leave and go on my own. And when I left, I ditched convention, I ditched insurance companies, and I just listened. And over the last 10 to 15 years of doing this work, I have listened to hundreds, if not thousands of stories. And I've had the privilege of understanding and knowing that these stories are universal. Our hungers are universal. Whether we are male or female, Black or white, CEO, executive, caretaker, housewife, student, we all experience the same hungers. For example, I talk about Sophie. She's the first chapter in my book, and her hunger for perfection. Sophie was a young girl. She was the eldest of 4 children, born into an immigrant family. And in her desire to acknowledge her parents' sacrifice and to acknowledge their hardship, she strove for perfection in everything she did. Of course, being the eldest and of an immigrant family myself, I could connect completely with her story. And the only thing that she could hang on to was a bulge of excess weight at her midsection. From my recollection, she wasn't even really overweight in terms of BMI, but this desire for perfection was what was driving her. What we came to figure out was that her hunger, while on the surface was for perfection, was really a hunger for self-compassion. And there's science to support this too. Because when we are on a path for perfection, and whether you are a perfectionist by clinical criteria or not, many of us have attributes of perfectionism, which essentially is defined by setting a goal, an unattainable goal, right? An unattainable goal. It is defined by a target that is constantly moving. And so in that way, perfection is actually a saboteur. We think that perfection, or our quest for perfection, is making us more successful, giving us more achievements, etc. But by definition, if we are setting goals that are unattainable, we're setting ourselves up for failure. And failure and imperfection and struggles and limitations are human, right? By definition, being human means being imperfect. But what do we do to ourselves in those moments when we experience an imperfection? When we experience a moment that maybe is embarrassing or suboptimal or not the way that we would have liked? Instead of offering ourselves a tone of understanding, a tone of self-compassion, we start to berate ourselves, right? The inner critic comes in, we talk negatively to ourselves. And what the science shows is that when you do that, when you can't accept yourself where you are at, you are actually less likely to have the resilience to engage, to move on, to grow, to evolve. Whereas a stance of self-compassion, of having awareness for your feelings in that moment and offering compassion to yourself, is actually an evidence-based strategy to build resilience. They've shown this in every single field, in business, in education, academics, but they've also shown this in terms of weight loss. They've actually done studies in which they have had people rate their dietary setbacks. So let's consider Labor Day, right? So typical story. Patients are doing great, losing a bunch of weight, exercising, eating clean, and then they go away for Labor Day. For 4 days, we're all sitting on our butts, eating, drinking, right? And so how do you rate that setback? If you're one to have savored it and be able to move on, right? I enjoyed it and now I'm going to move on. You are much more likely to get back on the wagon, as they say, back to resuming dietary behaviors that are in your favor, back to exercising, etc. Whereas those people who rated their dietary setback very negatively were less likely to resume positive behaviors and were less likely to lose weight as a result. So self-compassion actually is a key to achieving your goals, regardless of what they are. I talk about Justine, who was a mother. She came to tell me that she didn't have time to cook. She didn't have time to prep. She didn't have time to exercise. She didn't have time to sleep. And that her entire life, you know, she was working around her children. And here I am thinking, oh my gosh, she must be like, you know, dealing with infants, only to find out that her children were actually in high school. And so what came to be, which she thought was really a lack of, what is the one barrier? I mean, well, I pretty much said it, but the number one barrier to any kind of change is time, right? Nobody has time for anything. But really what it turned out was that this was a hunger for boundaries, right? Because she had allowed everything and everyone to come before her. And how common is this for us, right? We are strapped at work. We are strapped caring for our parents. We are strapped caring for our children. We are strapped in every which way possible. And yet, if an emergency comes up on someone else, right, is asking something of us, we always find the time. We always find the time. I think about my own experience as a young mom of, you know, young children. At the time I was a resident, I really had no time, right? But then all of a sudden an email would come through from the preschool for the Passover preschool Seder. On the Sign Up Genius was forks, napkins, and homemade latkes. Who do you think found time to make homemade latkes, right, as a resident? So time is a resource, right, that is a matter of boundaries. And boundaries are created when we value something, right? When we see it worthy of the time, the intention that is needed to care for it. And so the hunger here really is not for more time or less children or less work, but it's really for knowing your worth, knowing your value, knowing that you are worth the time and the intention that it takes to set those boundaries that are necessary for your own care. I talk about a mother named Scarlett, who had shared with me that she was a mother of 2 young children and had shared with me that her eldest, who is now 7 or 8, I think, or 9 years old, had been diagnosed with a neurodegenerative disease. And that she knew, based on this disease and genetic testing, that his lifespan would be shortened and that he would never live to adulthood. She had spent her entire, last 7-8 years of her life taking this child to appointments, fighting with insurance companies for medications, physical therapy, occupational therapy, and in the doing of all this work, had lost herself. Not only has she stopped yoga and the arts that she loved to do, but as a result, she had also gained weight. What does one say to a mother? There is really no words. There is no comfort. There is no sugarcoating, right? There is really only presence. And with this and to this, I could relate myself as well, because in the midst of the pandemic, a little background story on my father, which you will, if you choose to read the book, you'll see his colorful personality. So my father had left Iran at age 11. He went to boarding school in England in order to pursue higher education, but he never returned. And from England came here and went to UCLA and went to undergrad, and then went across the country picking up master's degrees and PhDs. And by the time I was born, he had 3 masters and 2 PhDs. His brain was his Mecca. And I always joke that if you look up the word intellectual snob in the dictionary, you will see a picture of my father in there. And so how ironic that in the pandemic, we started noticing changes that he had brought up to me about 10 years ago. He had started forgetting things. When he first told me about this, my second child was an infant. And I remember the day that he pulled me out of clinic in order to share this news that he had forgotten something. I had literally forgotten Cameron, my infant, while I was dropping off my 3-year-old at preschool. And so, of course, I brushed it off. But 10 years later, and isolation during the pandemic really brought these things to light. And my father was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. In the moment that we got the diagnosis, I was sitting in front of a screen like this. The doctor was highlighting images of his MRI in little white areas where his brain had already atrophied. And in my mind, I'm thinking, is he going to forget me? Is he going to forget my children? Thoughts that go through your head. And I thought back to Scarlett, right? There is no sugarcoating, but there is presence. Because in this moment, Scarlett's child is thriving. In this moment, my father still recognizes my children. And how many of us really go through our lives worried, scared, anxious, uncertain, and not really embracing this very moment, this current moment, where presence is all that we have. How much time do we have, Lindsay?
We have like 13 minutes, so you can.
So I also talk about another young lady and her hunger for imagination. So this woman had a long history of obesity in her family. Her mom was obese, her father was obese, her grandparents were obese, and had diabetes and all of the complications that came along with it. She was 23 years old. She had already had bariatric surgery. She had participated in all the commercial weight loss programs. She had lost and regained hundreds of pounds 5 times over. And in her mind, she thought there was nothing that could be done, right? There was nothing that she could do in order to change her genetics. The interesting thing here is that the genetics of obesity is really very unclear. There are really very few genes that are associated with obesity, despite the fact that 40% of the population is obese and over 70% of our US population is overweight and obese. And studies have actually shown that environment is more important than genetics. And so there's a group of Indians called the Pima Indians, which I think originally lived in Arizona, or lived in an area in Mexico. And they took part of them and they moved them to Arizona, or they migrated. I forget the details. And they found that the ones in Mexico, right, were all lean, free of obesity and diabetes, while the ones that lived in Arizona or in the United States had a very high prevalence of not only obesity, but also diabetes. And so they showed that environment was actually more important. But now there are studies that show that there's something that is more important than both your genetics as well as your environment, and that is your mindset. And they've done mindset work again in all these areas and facets, like academics, like business, and have shown how with positive mindset you can cultivate success. But one would think that like health matters is different, right? Like how can you mindset yourself out of autoimmune disease, for example, right? Or medical issues. There's an interesting thing called epigenetics. And epigenetics is not actually the genes that we were given, right? So not actually the gene that makes me have brown eyes or more likely to be obese. Epigenetics is what turns on and off that gene. And what they have shown is what you engage in and the things that you do actually have an effect not only on your own genetics, but also the genetics of your children and your children's children. And it reminds me of the study in which they did, in which they took two groups of people and put them on functional exercise testing. So they tested their basically their functional capacity as well as their lung capacity, right? Very hard metric. Then they drew blood from the two groups. And to one group of individuals, they said, you have a gene that makes you super athletic. Oh my God, you are a super athletic human based on this gene. And then they told the other group that, so sorry, but you have a gene that makes you, really sedentary. You can never be athletic. Mind you, this was a bogus gene. They took everyone and they put them back on treadmill testing, functional testing, and measured lung capacity. And believe it or not, the individuals who thought they had a gene, the bogus gene that made them more athletic, performed better on functional testing and actually had improved lung capacity as compared to the group that didn't believe in this functional or in this gene, having had this gene. And so it really shows you the power of mindset, right? We have to have imagination that we can be more than we are today. And how many times do we label ourselves? I often have patients come into the office. Not only do they label themselves as forever overweight or obese, but most commonly I hear people who labeling themselves as like not exercisers, right? Like I can't exercise, or I can't do this, or I can't do that, or I'm not fit, right? These labels actually have an impact not only on our mindset, but also on our genetics. And what if we dare to imagine something different? And so I have to share a personal story of when I was in high school. And back then we had to run the mile once a week, I think it was. In my memory, it was daily. But since I started sharing this story, I've had some old high school friends come and tell me that, no, Adrienne, you're not remembering the story right. It was really only once a week. So here I am once a week in those gross nylon shorts where my legs are chafing, as I run. And while everyone does the 12-minute mile or the 13-minute mile, some people, of course, did the 8-minute mile. We're not going to talk about them. I'm at minute like 16, huffing and puffing, sweating. My heart is beating, through my chest. And I am just flipping miserable. So miserable that the coach actually told me, you know what? You can just come and grade papers for the rest of the semester. I think it was as painful for him to watch me run the mile as it was for me to actually participate. So fast forward, now I'm in medical school and I meet a group of girls who like run for fun. And in my mind, I'm thinking, who are these psychotic people? But of course, now I'm in medical school and in the spirit of making new friends, I say to myself, hell, I'll go run with these girls. And so I start to run, and as I'm running, I realize something interesting happened. You know, over time, that exerting, that heart palpitating, that huffing and puffing, actually it kind of grew into this not only presence, but actually a really effective way to manage my angst and anxiety. Now, we all know that when you exercise, that we release endorphins, right? We release endorphins, we release serotonin, dopamine goes up, and all of those things that make you feel good, right? But what they've actually shown is that something special happens with vigorous activity, intense activity, that activity that like makes you want to die while you're doing it. And that is that when you expose yourself to physical stress, right? You make yourself more capable of tolerating psychological stress. And so that ability to manage your anxiety and to build resilience, and really let's think about it. What is it that we need right now? When we are still faced with the uncertainty that we are faced with, right? The degree of isolation that is still lingering, right? The fear that is still lingering. For some people, it's financial. For some people, it's physical, mental, emotional. Resilience is really what we need to persevere. And so if we can think about our hunger for movement in a little different way, and if we can have imagination, if we can dare to imagine our labels in a different way. I kept running, and several years later, I got an email, something about the LA, not an email, but some kind of pop-up of the LA Marathon. I thought to myself at the time, I was only running 2 or 3 miles. It's $100, right? Like if I forfeit the $100, it won't be the end of the world. And at the end of that 9 months, I ran the LA Marathon. The only thing between that girl huffing and puffing with chafed legs and the woman who ran the marathon was my ability, or at least my willingness to address a hunger for imagination, an imagination to be different. And so as I have sat here, and I realize now that I did not mention any of the backgrounds that you guys so kindly and generously put behind you. I got sidetracked, but read the book if you are interested. But as I have sat here in a place of privilege, really, to hear hundreds of stories and to notice that these hungers are so universal, right? We don't meet our hunger with open-mindedness and self-compassion. We meet it with shame, we meet it with self-loathing, we meet it with self-soothing, alcohol, drugs, shopping. I've been told that some people are sexing over their hungers, right? But these hungers are universal. I've known it because of my professional work. I have known it because of my personal work. And again, the antidote to this is the willingness to see ourselves in that moment and to offer ourselves self-compassion. And here is why it's so important. Because before we can give compassion to each other, right? And this is something that is known to be psychologically true. We have to have the ability to have compassion for ourselves. And if you think about this time in our lives, when it's vaxxers against non-vaxxers, Republicans against Democrats, schooling at home versus schooling out, believers versus non-believers, true news versus fake news. The only thing that is going to heal our current situation is compassion for each other. And that begins with compassion for ourselves. And God knows that we could use that healing in this moment. And so I want to end there and really, again, give props to JVS and WLN and all the wonderful people that support it, because your mission of supporting each other is so in line with what really rectifies these hungers, that ability to connect and to, be in community towards a positive, meaningful expression of our work. And so I appreciate that you have asked me to come and that you're still here and listening to me 40 minutes in. And I look forward to partnering with WLN in the future to help promote your mission in any way that I can.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Adrian. We really appreciate it. So we do have, first, I just want to thank you again for your time and for sharing all those wonderful sentiments with us. And I wanted to kind of to introduce you to Zina Manzareh, who is one of our JVS clients. And she is a very accomplished young woman. And her role as a nutrition care representative at Cedars-Sinai is really representative of a lot of what Dr. Adrian has been speaking about. Our relationship with food can represent many things, and it's how we come together. It can be comforting. It can show people that we care. And that's exactly what Zina does every day. And some of you may recognize Zina as one of our clients who spoke at our conference last year, but she's back, which is wonderful. And Zina, I just wanted to kind of ask you a few questions before we open it up to a larger Q&A, the Q&A portion. So let me I'll spotlight you so that people can see your beautiful face. So Zina, just maybe if you want to introduce yourself, share a little bit about yourself, your childhood, how you got to where you are in terms of coming to the US, just sharing a little bit more about your personal story.
Sure. Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you, doctor. It was really good. I enjoyed everything. Thank you. My name is Zina Mansoureh. I know a lot of people know me already, and I'm from Sierra Leone, West Africa. I grew up there and came to the US in 2015. That's about 6 years ago. And I have been in school and working as well. I went to LACC, had my AA in 2020 in liberal arts, and I'm trying to get into nursing school. And I work at Cedars-Sinai as a nutrition care representative. Yeah, basically that's a summary of it.
Thank you. And Zina, can you share what first inspired you to pursue a career in healthcare?
Well, healthcare has always been something that I actually want to go into because of what I saw growing up. We have poor medical facilities and techniques, whatever it is. It's not up to date in my country. And growing up, I lost a lot of people. And the most important person was my mom. She died when I was a year old because of infections that would have been preventable. And I always, when I was growing up a little bit and they got to tell me the story, I always looked into it as something that they could have worked or something that would have been better. I mean, I'll still have her by now if the right procedures were followed. So my heart has always been in healthcare, if not for anything, but to actually go back and help people or just help the ones that I have here around me in the US. So that's one of the main reasons I want to get into healthcare, because I really care.
Thank you, Zina. And did you experience any challenges along the way, but and when you first heard about JVS, kind of what were you going through at the time?
Well, during the first time I heard about JVS, I was at LACC and I wanted like a foot in the door in any healthcare hospital, basically. It wasn't, even if it wasn't a hospital, but just in healthcare, basically. because I used to work at Target, and I wanted to become a CNA, but because of school, it was too much. And I mean, the financial constraints as well. So I met one of the representatives of JVS at, I think it was a job fair we had at LECC. And she told me about JVS and told me it was completely free. I can get into CNA, the CNA program. I can get into the Career Works Medical, which is a non-clinical program for people that want to get into healthcare, but not the clinical aspect of it. And it was more flexible and it was free. I mean, the free part was what motivated me more. So I'm like, okay, sure, I'd love to get into it. So she gave me a call and then I applied, went to the interview, and yeah, I got accepted. So my journey for the nutrition, I think it was for patient service representative. But then after the program, I applied to Cedars. I mean, greatly with the help of JVS as well, because the resume, the applications, all that push came from them. And then I applied at Cedars and actually got the position for the nutrition care representative.
Amazing. Thank you. And what does your day-to-day look like for those of us who aren't familiar with kind of the role that you have as nutrition care representative?
So as a nutrition care representative, I work at the cancer center, the infusion center at Cedars, and I deal with patients when they come in to get infusion. So I serve them from a menu that we have. So we give it to them, and whilst they're taking their medications or, their infusions, we serve them their food, we talk to them for a little while, and just be there for them basically through the aspects of food, like serving them, getting to talk to them, getting to share with them what they like or what they would like to eat later on. And sometimes they just tell you about their life and what they're going through. So at that moment, you get time to give them something, which is food, and be there for them as well, whilst listening to some of the issues that they go through.
That's amazing. Thank you. And can you share with us what your kind of longer term goal is?
So my long-term goal is to become a registered nurse. That's what I'm trying to get into school for. And I think I'm almost there.
That's great. Anything else you want to share, Zena, about your experience with JVS and the WLN?
Yeah, well, JVS has been really amazing. I feel like when it comes to JVS, I have a lot of things to say, and mostly good things, because I feel like I'll not be where I'm at today if I didn't bump into your representative. I forgot her name already. But yeah, so I started this program through them and actually had my foot in the door in a career that I actually want to work in the long term. So there's a lot of skills that I've, learned while I was in the hospital, and it would have been possible if I didn't meet you guys. So I'm grateful. I'm grateful for JVS.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So I'd love to open up the Q&A portion of the event. So we actually had a few questions that came in advance. So I'm just going to, the first question actually was for Zena. So how do you see food as a way to care for and help your patients? And, can you tell us about maybe an experience where you connected with one of your patients in that way?
Yes. Food is an amazing thing. Even in our normal lives, when people want to meet or when they want to hang out, they're like, oh, can we do dinner? Can we do lunch together so we can talk about different things? It's the same thing at the hospital when you're a nutrition care representative. So when I get to meet my patients, I remember this one specific scenario when, I went in there I always communicate with them. I love it. I mean, just get me started and I'll talk about anything. So, we started talking, I served him his food. And one important thing about my relationship with my patients is that if I've seen you like once or twice, I actually remember what you like. I'm like, I know you like apple slices. I know you like apple juice, just that base. And they appreciate that. I'm like, oh, you want some vanilla ice cream? They're like, oh yeah, so you remembered. So that little, just to know that I care about them and I remember their names. And this one time, you know, I was talking to one of my patients and he loved apple slices. I'm like, oh, I can bring you more. So he's like, oh, you're always smiling. You always care so much. And then he started telling me about the news he got from his doctor. And, you know, he wanted someone to talk to. He wanted someone to be there for him. You know, I can see that that little time they spent with someone else, especially someone at the hospital, meant a lot to them, you know? And me just spending 5 or 10 minutes with him meant a lot to him. It did. So I feel like if I wasn't there serving him or providing that, you know, service to him, then I don't know. It's really fulfilling though. It's so fulfilling. And the trust that they have, that they put in us to, you know, serve them, to communicate with us, something that I deeply, deeply appreciate. Yeah, I do.
Thank you. Well, thank you for all of your hard work, and we really just salute you for everything you've accomplished and can't wait to hear more about your career journey as you move forward.
Thank you.
And just for everyone, you know, the CareerWorks medical program that Zena went through is actually one of the programs that the Women's Leadership Network supports. So thank you all. You have also supported Zena. So thank you very, very much for that. So we have a few questions for Dr. Adrian, and I'm just gonna kick it off with, you know, changing one's lifestyle can take a long time and a lot of effort, obviously. So, you know, how would you recommend people stay motivated? You talked a lot about positive thinking, and do you have any kind of practical tips for how to stay motivated?
Okay, there we go. Yeah, you know, there's so much there, and you know, like I said, there's a lot of concrete ways in which we can manage people's hunger, practical strategies, right, to manage people's hunger, help people lose weight. But what I found really is that you know, addressing that underlying thing or things is really critical to manage our relationship with food. And I just want to say that this connection between food and emotion, food and love, is really hardwired in our neurobiology. So when you think about it, like oxytocin, which is the first hormone that is released in a mother's blood when she's giving birth, it's the hormone that brings about milk, right, to feed a child, is the same hormone that creates a love and connection between the mother and the child, which fosters and facilitates a sense of connection and bonding. So I think the first step is really just understanding this connection, right? Like food is co-mingling with love and with emotion. And so if we can understand that, right? If we can be compassionate for that and not blame ourselves for it, understanding the science, in my mind, really goes a long way to managing it, right? Because that knowledge is power. There's so many things I could say about motivation, but I think the most important, or one of the points that I want to just bring up now, is not so much motivation, but expectation. I think the key to durable, long-term success in anything really is managing our expectations. And so I'm going to give you a quick anecdote for this, right? So I'll have a patient who comes in during the pandemic. They've gained 20 pounds, 25 pounds, 30 pounds, right? I ask them, you know, what is it that you're trying to accomplish? Oh my God, I've done everything. If I could just lose 5 pounds, I would be happy. Great. So they come back 2 weeks later, it's 2 pounds. Another 2 weeks later, it's 2 pounds. They are so frustrated. Really? Why are you frustrated? 2 pounds per week is nothing, right? I would argue with that because 2 pounds per week is 8 pounds per month, is 24 pounds per quarter, right? But the expectation that it should be something more derails them, right? And that energy that they could put towards going forward and actually achieving that 24-pound weight loss, let's just say over the course of 3 months, really backfires and sabotages their efforts. So in order for us to move forward in any endeavor, it's really about managing our expectations, right? And acknowledging those small wins because, you know, with time and persistence, it adds up.
Thank you. We have some questions in the chat here. Debbie asks, we know you have a podcast. What type of information do you share on your podcast?
Oh, thank you, Fabiola. I think she just put the link up. So yes,
Oh, great.
I have a bunch of different resources that I think would, you know, if people are interested, it would be helpful. The podcast is called Health Bite, and I call it Health Bite because I like to leave people with small actionable bites towards better physical, mental, and emotional well-being. So it's really supposed to be a short little clip. On my website that I think Fabiola also put up earlier, I have other resources like blogs. You can sign up for a newsletter where I send out a weekly newsletter. And I also have a writing or journaling guide, because one of the questions I've been asked most since publishing this book is how do you figure out your hunger? And I would say that any quiet practice in which you settle yourself and can really just be with yourself and present, whether that's mindfulness or meditation or exercise or cooking or washing dishes. For me, it's always been writing and journaling. And so the journaling prompt there is really intended to guide people through, excuse me, some of the questions that help us really understand and identify our underlying hunger.
Thank you. And we have some specific questions about a plant. Do you recommend specific nutrition to your patients? Is it really personalized, or do you recommend a specific type of nutritional diet, such as plant-based or otherwise? And sort of related, but if you're kind of looking to, if your goals may not just be weight loss, but also healthy, you know, staying healthy and having high energy, do you have any specific suggestions, you know, there?
Yeah, so I'm going to address the second question first, because it turns out that no matter what your goal is, whether you're trying to be, you know, better in academics, whether you're trying to gain more energy, whether you're trying to improve your type 2 diabetes, whether you're trying to prevent cognitive decline in Alzheimer's disease, all of these things, the ways in which we achieve all of these things is the very same thing that helps us lose and maintain healthy weight. So some of the things that I talk about in addition to the food, of course, is movement. And so exercise, regardless of whether or not you lose an ounce, will improve every disease that is related to excess weight, including cancer and preventing cognitive decline. I talk about sleep because sleep, we know that when people have sleep deprivation, their hunger hormones go up. And so they've shown in laboratories that as little as 2 nights of sleep deprivation not only makes hunger hormones go up, but also increases the desire for highly palatable foods. I always say that when I was an undergrad pulling all-nighters, it wasn't my fault that I wanted donuts the next morning. It was my hormones that was doing it. And now there's science to back that up. So mindfulness and meditation, guess what? It's not only helpful for habit change, but it also has been shown to reduce depression, anxiety, reduce inflammatory markers. So there's a blood marker called CRP. Some of you may know about it. We check it for autoimmune disease. It's a surrogate for heart disease in women. And believe it or not, meditation, mindfulness meditation has been shown to reduce CRP. So regardless of what your goal is, weight loss, weight maintenance, vitality, energy, cognitive health, whatever your X factor, the things that are going to help you maintain healthy weight will also help you maintain all of those things. Now, in terms of the dietary piece, I really don't ascribe to any kind of fad diet. Really, this is a very unsexy answer. People are not going to like this answer because they're going to want me to say that if you pee on a keto stick, that is the answer. but it's not. And what I really recommend is a balanced diet. So high protein, yes, because protein suppresses hunger hormones. It's harder for the plant-based folks because it's harder to stay full. Lots of veggies, not only because they're low calorie, but because they provide vitamins, minerals, nutrients, antioxidants. So you're really nourishing yourself. Carbohydrates, like not all carbohydrates are the same, right? Like garbanzo beans are different than Pop-Tarts. So let's not categorize them in the same way. Garbanzo beans, lentils, beans, legumes, actually incorporating even half a cup a day has been shown to prolong your lifespan, and it's filling and it's a source of protein. So I recommend a really balanced approach in addition to movement, sleep, mindfulness. And I really recommend a mindset change. And I will just leave you with one. I have a lot of these little things that I like to share with people, but I really like approaching this from a mindset of abundance and not restriction. What does restriction do? And I posted this on Instagram recently because for some reason, every Yom Kippur, I wake up wanting pancakes. I don't even eat pancakes. Why do I want pancakes? Because I can't have it, right? And so when you restrict yourself, you invariably are going to want that thing that you can't have. Food and healthy eating is not about restriction. It's actually about abundance. Eat so much of that which serves you so that there is less room, desire, space for that which is not, right? For that which does not serve you. And really this whole thing about like the chicken being the size of the palm of your hand. I mean, whose hand are we talking about? Last time I checked, nobody gained weight from eating too much chicken. So eat the good stuff with abundance so that there's less room for what does not serve you.
Thank you so much. Well, I want to be sensitive to everyone's time. I think we're just a couple minutes over, but thank you all for your time this evening. And we really look forward to seeing you at our Woman to Woman conference on Thursday, November 18th. You will all be getting an invitation in the following days. And just want to thank you so much for all of your support around the year. And we're just excited to present another amazing program for you all in November. So thank you, Dr. Adrian. Thank you, Zena. You were both incredible and offered a lot of wonderful insight tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.